Thank you for taking my place. Oh, you're welcome. No problem. Anna Marie.
That was really you.
Here, I'll get you that right here.
Ron, you there?
Hold on 1 second, Chad. I think I'm there. How's that?
There he is. Everybody say hi to Ron.
Hi, Ron. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Ron. So this is a oh look, he put the sticker right there. Look at that guy. You like it? So Ron has agreed to I would like Ron to tell us a little bit about his product. We are going to be doing the group buy that we did last year, so it gives you an opportunity to try out Ron's his WOW line of products. It's what Ron uses. You know, he told me that he tests everything, you know, religiously, and that if it's going to have his name on it, it really needs to be the best. And that's something I would like Ron to tell us a little bit about his products and just in general, you know, what makes them special. And then past that, he's agreed to answer some questions for us. And it's my understanding that the sky's the limit. Don't get too personal. Keep it kind of pumpkin related. And yeah, Ron, so can you tell us about your products?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on today. It was sort of a last minute thing, and I appreciate all the support from the Colorado growers. Not only the pumpkin growers, but they grow an awful lot of things in Colorado. That is the #1 area that I ship WOW to is Colorado.
I think he's talking about vegetables.
They're growing a lot of things out there in Colorado. It's worked out great for me, but I appreciate everybody and their support over the last few years for myself and my product line. So once again, thank you very much. So basically about my products, everybody wants to always ask, you know, what's my #1 seller is the WOW Mycorrhizal fungi. You know, that is my biggest seller by far to the pumpkin growers, not only pumpkin, but to other industries. And you know, what makes it special is, it's like I was talking to Chad yesterday, is there's a lot of people in the mycorrhizae space, especially over the last 5 or 6 years. You know, pretty much with the growth of hemp and cannabis is what has exploded mycorrhizae. So there's been a lot of new players for the space and everything. But, you know, there's a lot of research and development that goes into producing a high quality mycorrhizae. And if I'm going to be selling it, I'll put my name on the bag, and it has to test over 300 propagules per gram. And that's difficult to do. You know, there's a lot of people that don't put their results out there for people to see, quite frankly, because they can't attain certain levels. I'm very blessed to be working with Reforestation Technologies, RTI. They are my manufacturer, and if it doesn't make a certain grade, you know, it does not go in a bag for WOW. I mean, it can get sold off as cover crop grade. It'll go into other, you know, other seed starter mixes and stuff like that. But for me to put my label on it, it has to be over 300 propagules per gram and be able to colonize it. That's a big thing. A lot of mycorrhizae is made very inexpensive nowadays, and it's made in vitro. The only problem with that is it doesn't colonize. It hasn't worked. We've found a few products that show some promise, but nothing that really colonizes quickly. You know, the mycorrhizae species, Rhizobacchus interradices, which is, you know, what I chose back when I started with Neil Anderson, the owner of RTI, back in 2004, which is we wanted a bacteria that would colonize in all soils, high organic matter, low organic matter, and outcompete everything that was in the soil. And you'll notice in mycorrhizae mixes, if you look on the back of the bag, there'll be different blends of endo and ecto mycorrhizae, but the one you'll always find in there is Rhizobacchus, because it outcompetes everything in the soil. And that used to be called Glomus interradices. The names just got changed on the bacteria over the last 4 or 5 years by the Oregon Department of Agriculture, because they oversee a lot of the mycorrhizae. So that's a little brief history on my mycorrhizae and, you know, why I chose to go with single species. But that is, you know, my biggest seller. I do a lot. The compost tea brews are certainly very popular. The seaweed, humic fulvic acid. Humic fulvic, I have that mined out of Alberta, Canada. It's a really nice product that helps feed your soil microbes. It also makes other fertilizers work a bit better. And I ship that in a long distance to be able to package it for a while because it dissolves really good and it's an extremely good product. Pretty much those are like the heavy hitters that I sell. Lots of kelp meal for the soil. A lot of people use that. I mean, kelp, fish, seaweed, that's one of the #1 things all gardeners are using because of the enzymes, natural amino acids in it, and, things like that. So, I mean, once again, the support has been tremendous. I have about 45 products on my site, and they all move, but, the ones I mentioned are the ones that seem to be the pumpkin growers want the most of.
Awesome. Is there any, Ron, I'm sure you get asked about 1 million questions every single day. For us, what's some of just give us some some broad reaching statements before we get into, asking you some specific questions, just some broad advice that you would have for, Joe Scherber, who's been doing it for about 78 years.
I see God's right there.
Where am I?
Just some general advice from the man himself.
General advice on growing it. I kind of missed the first part of the question there.
Oh, just general growing pumpkin, just in general.
I get a lot of emails every day. Believe it or not, there's thousands of people each year that are gaining entry into growing a giant pumpkin, and I never really realized that till I started my business, my website. It generally starts at this time of the year with somebody with their grandchild or granddaughter, and they want to grow a giant pumpkin, and they get hooked on a 50 or 100 pumpkin. Don't plan a lot. Start with 1 or 2. Go online, educate yourself. Start with the basics. You don't have to spend a ton of money on seeds. I think all growers will give you a seed for free. I mean, I sell seeds on my website, but I've never refused anybody a free seed, and I still send out hundreds of bundles each year of free seeds. All the seeds out there now have the genetics to grow a 2,000-pound pumpkin. Some are better than others, but you really don't have to spend a few $100s on a seed to get going. Network with growers in your area. Back when I started with PAP, there was really nothing, and we got out of it for about 4 or 5 years until Don Langevin book came out in 1991 on how to grow pumpkins. That was the first thing we ever had on paper that had some basics of how to grow. But nowadays, with just email somebody or call them, you can show up at somebody's house. I mean, at my place, there's people here every day throughout the summer. Every single day, someone will pull up and want to learn about growing a pumpkin, and we take the time out, and it helps the learning curve if you can stand in and around somebody's patch and ask questions and see how you deadhead a plant and how big the plants are. So I always kind of tell people, start small, start slow. Get your soil balanced, work with people in your area to see what works in your area. I mean, how I balance the soil here in Rhode Island with sandy loam might not work in Colorado, but I can give you some basics of, general base saturation and things like that. And then as growers, they get interested a little bit more, I recommend tissue testing and things like that. So it's really wonderful to see people evolve and growers evolve from going to their first way off and then, competing on a local level and then competing on a world level. So it's quite exciting to see people doing well. But my biggest advice always is kind of start small. You don't have to break the bank for products. You can get going with some rudimentary gardening skills and some compost and a willing and a desire to do it. Because as everybody knows, these don't happen by accident. You have to put some effort into it. And so that's the best advice I can give for people getting going.
Awesome. So who has a question? Calvin.
What,
So
Ron,
come sit in the chair, Calvin. The speaker's right here, so you gotta do it. You're in the hot seat.
So, what do you use for powdery mildew control?
Okay, powdery mildew. Right now, I'm using. Hold on, I'm forgetting the name of it. 1 second. I do have my spray and drench program around here. I switched products a couple of years ago, and I don't know why that's eluding me at this time, but what, I'll probably remember it before we get back in, before we finish up the program. But I switched to a new product. Powdery mildew hasn't been a problem here for us in a long, long time, but I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on that name right now. I'm sure I'll remember it for the end of the conversation.
Is it chemical based or is it biological?
Yeah, it's chemical based. My whole program is a basis of chemicals and biologicals, whether fertilizing or insect and disease control. Yeah, and, I have a lot of people who try to do it organically, but it's almost impossible to compete on a world level doing it organically.
Okay.
Hey, and Ron, that's a question that I'm curious about too. When you're talking, because biologics are such a big thing. So, when you're using your mycorrhiza and a chemical, a chemical of some flavor, does that kill your beneficials in the soil? So if you're spraying for powdery mildew, washes down into your soil, gets absorbed by the plant, is that are you kind of counteracting those two things there?
Great question. The hardest one, what we found through testing, not only in our lab out in California, but universities and stuff, is Cleary's is about the harshest on mycorrhizae. It will not eliminate, it will suppress to some level. That's why in my program, I stopped to work the Cleary's in August. If you don't have mycorrhizal colonization long before that, then the product you were using or your conditions weren't favorable for colonization. So I work Cleary's in later in the season for one drench, maybe two maximum, because the high disease area around here is August. You get a lot of hot, humid weather. This year, from the first week of August till the layoffs, I think I watered one time. We had record rainfall. It was extremely difficult in certain areas in New England this year, and it was very hot and humid. So that's why I worked the Cleary's in later. A lot of them have shown not to suppress it. Doing, matter of fact, Subdue, which is one of the #1 products used for Pythium, Subdue is actually used to grow mycorrhizae. It helps grow mycorrhizae. So, Subdue drenches in your program is only going to help you. It doesn't suppress at all. Matter of fact, it's a growth product for mycorrhizae. If you're doing foliar chemicals, foliar does not affect mycorrhizae at all, okay? Because those foliar just goes through the exelm system of the plant. What really suppresses mycorrhizae is heavy drenches. And that would be watering over the top and then washing it in down into the root system. And that's how those chemicals have to be used to suppress diseases. And Cleary's is a great product, and I do use it, but that will suppress a bit. Well, what happens is after I use a Cleary's drench, probably about 4 or 5 days later, I'll go back in with my biologicals. So my program is always heavy organics in the beginning. It's about 80% organic and 20% synthetic or chemical. And I'll build up the organics right out of the gates, and then I'll start slowly slipping in some of the other things later on in the season. We really don't have problems here until mid-July or later, but by August 1st, you have to be drenching with at least a couple of good drenches, or you won't make it down the stretch.
Awesome. And then kind of on that same kind of topic, here, it's my understanding you're on a well, and there's a handful of us here that are on wells, but a lot of us are on city water with chlorine and chloramines. Does watering in untreated water, is that going to kill all the colonies of mycorrhiza if we're watering in chloramine?
Now, what we found is that unless your water is undrinkable and the chlorine levels are so high, it has not suppressed or inhibited the growth of mycorrhizal fungi. I mean, your water would have to be almost undrinkable. It'd have to be like Clorox bleach, chlorine type to suppress or not allow mycorrhizae to grow. So, those levels are easily dissipated when you run water through your sprinkler system. If you have high levels like that, chlorine or bleached out water dissipates by the time it hits the atmosphere and walks and goes down through the root system of plants. So that's pretty easy to get rid of.
Cool. So who else has some questions for Ron? Don't be shy.
Morning, Mr. Wallace.
Joe, how you doing?
Good. I got a question from Jimmy the Biz Grandy. He wants to know his unopened bag of pumpkin fro year-old. What do you guess? He's kept it cool. How much percentage of activity do you think it still
Sure,
has?
hey, that's a great question. And I test, like I said, I test Mycorrhizal again and again and again all the time. I've tested some bags that are 4 years old here that I keep in rotation on my personal shelf so I can see what the suppression is. I guarantee a 2-year shelf life on an unopened bag. Okay, if the bag is open after a year, you're gonna lose about 15% because once again, it's a dormant bacteria. But if the bag is unopened, we've virtually seen no loss in Mycorrhizal and colonization or anything because it is kept in a cool, dry place. It's kept in a bag. So we've virtually found nothing. But once a bag gets opened, you will start to, once the egg gets in a bag, you will start to lose. You will still start to lose some. And, another thing I like to add is I produce or have manufactured only a certain amount each year based on the season before his previous sales. So my stuff gets in and it gets moved out really fast. This year's inventory as of August of last year was never anything from the season before. Everything gets sold out fast. So everything that just recently came into inventory for me, that'll be gone by June, and then another batch will come in. So I keep it what I call lean and mean. So I don't have any inventory that's ever hanging around because it's really, really important, any biologicals, to get it fresh, sell it fresh, use it fresh. If it's been sitting around on a shelf in a hydro store, chances are it's been there for a long time. Check the expiration dates on them because a lot of times they hide them up in the top of the bag where you really can't see them. I get a lot of emails from people with expired products. So that I want to.
Okay, and then I have, for me, as far as stimulating root development in an Atlantic giant plant, product-wise, what do you recommend to get the most bang for my buck? And also watering as the plant develops, low water level, start plant, too much water. What are your personal strategies as far as getting the established rooting system maxed out?
Sure. Well, start with the balancing in your soil and have some really nice organic levels in there because it's all about that rhizosphere, that area around the roots. And in a nice organic soil, when the compost is being devolved by microbes, what happens is, as everybody knows, it releases a natural NPK in the root system of the plant. That's a rhizosphere. So if your soil's nice and balanced, and you have a nice carbon-nitrogen ratio so the microbes have food to eat, that helps stimulate your root system, get it going. Kelp meal is one of the absolute best things, especially for the price. It's relatively cheap to do for your soil. Because if you look at all the enzymes, all the natural plant growth regulators and everything in kelp meal, it's something that pretty much everybody can agree on. It's one of the best things you should be doing. So, like 15 pounds per 1,000 square foot in the spring, that really gets your plants off to a good start. Cover cropping is also tremendous because in the spring when you turn under, I don't know what type of cover crops used in your area, but winter rye is very prevalent here. When you till that under in the spring, that's a tremendous food source for microbes. So I'm all about microbes and feeding the soil to feed the roots. Once again, Mycorrhizal along with azos, I use an awful lot of azos. Azos is one of the #1 cloning solutions used in the cannabis industry. What azos does is it drops roots really fast, incredibly fast. And the more roots you have, the more areas you have for inoculation by Mycorrhizal beneficial bacterias, and also azos, produces IAA, indole-3 acetic acid, which is a natural plant growth hormone. So it really helps plants get established quickly. So generally, good organic biology in the soil will help your plants in the spring, but the soil's got to be warm. When the soil's cool in the spring, everything's kind of dormant. That's why sometimes you have to use a little synthetics to give it, a little cal nitrate in the spring is not going to hurt anything. That's how I boost my plants along when the soil's cool. I've gone to bigger greenhouses, heating cables, things like that. You gotta get that soil kind of warm in the spring because the plant's not gonna do a lot if the soil's cool. The microbes are lazy, they're not established yet, they're not reproducing. So get that soil up to temp, get all that good organic biology in there, get it going. Pumpkin growers are the most fascinating growers on earth. I tell that all the time with people I speak with, that agriculture can learn a lot from us, and they have. And when we started out, they would kind of laugh at us when I would reach out to them about growing a giant pumpkin. Well, all these years later, they're not laughing anymore because they come to a lot of pumpkin growers, not only me, but everybody else, about what we're doing and how we've grown these pumpkins and genetics and soil biology so good. So it's kind of a testament to all the growers. But I think a lot of it comes down to basics at times, having the right organics in the soil and balanced NPK and a healthy soil, one that's not overworked. Don't work the soil when it's wet. All those basic things that you learned years and years ago from family in the garden still hold true today.
Thank you.
Question.
Yep.
Hello, Master Wallace. Could you speak some more? I've got a bunch of liquid azos and mycos.
It was a nice T-shirt. I like it.
Do you like this shirt?
I love it. Yeah, great. Thanks.
Always happy, and thank you for doing this for the club too. They're gonna get a lot out of it. I know they
Anytime.
appreciate it a lot. What is the longevity for the liquid azos and the mycos in the bottle? How long can those go in unopened bottle? I still got the plastic bag around.
Yeah, it's a year's shelf life. The azos, the liquid azos, what I'm finding through testing, it's a lot less. I think what we're gonna do coming up here in the spring, that's a great question, Wizzy, is gonna be probably a 4-month shelf life on the liquid azos, because we have noticed that once you open that bottle on anything else, it's gonna start to lose its levels and everything. So to be safe, to get through a season, because I'm not huge on, once September comes, I tell growers, I don't want to see people waste money at all. If you're putting on those type of products in September, that down the home stretch, it's too little too late and you're just wasting money. But that needs to get established early. So we're pretty much, a new label should be out soon on the azos. It's going to be called Azos Red. It's not a full organic product, but what we found is it works a lot. It works a lot better than the current Azos Blue. The Azos Blue is still a great product, but the Azos Red, we're probably going to have a 4-month shelf life on it, so I will not be picking that up until probably May. And that's been after some years of research and development. The liquid mycos, the reason I removed that from my site was that it was the amount of propagules and colonization was dropping off so readily after you open the container. And the propagules per gram and the spore counts and everything are tremendous. But once you opened it up, there's a vapor barrier. You notice if you buy a liquid mycorrhizal and stuff, there's always a little hole in the top of the cap. Well, that's a vapor barrier. And underneath, that way, because it's biological, it has to breathe, it has to live. RTI spent millions of dollars to try to create the perfect bottle to make sure the mycorrhizal, the liquid, which is generally for the cannabis industry, they spent millions of dollars to try to develop that bottle to make sure they could carry it through with a good 6-month, 8-month shelf life. And what I found, and what we found through testing, was it was dropping off quicker and quicker, and I didn't feel comfortable selling that myself to growers and everything else. So it went back to the drawing board to get redesigned, and they're still working on the packaging and stuff. The granular mycorrhizal, to me, it colonized. We're finding colonization in 7 to 10 days, which is very, very fast for mycorrhizal. It's still pound for pound. It was the best out there. So if the liquid does become available, if we can prove through testing, it's going through another field trial, so to speak, in the lab, if it can prove out that it can stay sustainable in that container, then it'll go back up on the site. If not, I won't put it up.
Thank you much. Hope to see you up in Green Bay.
I'll be there.
All right, who else has questions?
I've got one. Do I have to go up there?
You can relay to me, I'll tell him.
Okay.
Come on, don't be shy.
Would you just ask him about tissue sampling? Sell it to me. you know, so he does tissue sampling
Okay.
throughout the year.
So Betsy,
And on that, what labs does he use for soil?
so
Midwest?
Betsy and Calvin want to know. She said, sell her on tissue testing. You know why she should do it, the benefit of it. And Calvin wants to know, where do you send your tissue samples off to?
Sure, Western Laboratories in Parma, Idaho, it's test 11A, I believe, is where I send everything off to for tissue testing. And I do tissue, if you're only gonna do a few tissue tests a year, the most important one is right before pollination, okay? Because believe it or not, a lot of what you're gonna get out of that pumpkin in cell division and cell elongation is done in the first 20 days of growth. Everything has to be right there and readily available because those cells divide and, you know, and split at such lightning pace that everything has to be there. So a week before pollination is very, very important. And then maybe about 3 weeks after pollination when fruit load stress comes into play. So I'm gonna sell you on tissue testing here. Western Labs, I don't get paid by Western Labs. I know John, the owner, very, very well. I can tell you this, if you cut your petioles out on a Sunday evening, get them ready to ship on Monday, by Thursday, you'll have your results, number one. Number two, they're a huge company, but it's a company that I love to work with because you can get on the phone and ask for the owner and say, hey, can I speak with John? And if John's not available, they'll give you his personal cell phone number to call him. And, you know, they deal in potatoes and, you know, they do a lot of pumpkin growers, but high-end crops where if a farmer doesn't make his yield, they have problems sustaining their own self. John is absolutely brilliant. And he loves what we're doing and he loves the giant pumpkin growers. And the tests are reasonable. And I think it's like $40 for a test now or something. It could be a little less, but the reason you tissue test is most giant pumpkin growers can show up at a patch and look at a plant and say, well, yeah, that looks nitrogen deficiency. This base is kind of low, it's lacking. Or magnesium, you get a little blotchiness in the leaves where everybody thinks it's, you know, a lot of people think they have a disease issue, but it's something as simple as a nutrient deficiency. You know, so a little Epsom salts with some magnesium and sulfur will perk the plant up. You know, potassium is pretty easy to see in a plant because the whole outside edge of the leaf on a mature leaf will get very brown. If you go to like Cornell's website and stuff, they have symptoms and deficiency symptoms on things, and you can get a lot of good information. And you can also pick up online what they call lower leaves and upper leaves, and it'll show you if you're going to get a nutrient deficiency of potassium, it's not showing up in a new leaf, it's showing up in an older leaf because the sink takes from the old leaves to the new leaves. So a lot of that information you can get online. But what no one can tell you, and I don't care who it is, John Taberna from Western Labs is the most brilliant person I've ever spoke with about tissue testing, about nutrients, about balancing of soil and everything. No one can look at a plant and tell you what it needs. So if anybody says, yeah, the plant tells me what I have to do, well, you know, so to speak, I can look at my plant one day and say, yep, I've known from tissue testing after all these years when certain sinks in my program are going to start to lack because of fruit load stress. So I know I have to ramp certain things up because my sandy loam soil, my weather, my watering, and I don't think I answered Joe's question on watering earlier, and I'll get to that afterwards. I know I have to ramp certain things up. The tissue testing will give you a great baseline every year. So once you do it for a few years, you'll know when you have to go to certain things. But no one can tell you hidden hunger when looking at a plant. I've looked, me and Joe Jutras, you know, we're together, you know, almost every other day during the summer, growing, trying to help each other. We push each other really hard to compete. And you can look at a plant that looks absolutely perfect, and you send that tissue test out, and that's not going to tell you that your boron is critically low. And boron is one of the most important things, especially at pollination time. You know, there's an old saying, calcium is the truck, but boron is the driver. And if your boron is not right, it will not make your calcium work. Your calcium is responsible for cell division, cell elongation in your pumpkin, which makes these pumpkins, which makes a 1,500 pounder, a 2,000 pounder or more. These genetics are so good, okay? But to really get to these levels that we're on the verge of in a few years, 3,000 pounds, anybody who grows these pumpkins or who's competing at the top, if they made their tissue tests available, you're gonna find that their calcium and boron is spot on, because it has to be, especially it's critical at that time. So I can look at plants and say, wow, that looks great, until you tissue test. So no one can tell you hidden hunger, and hidden hunger is responsible for a lot of pounds, especially with what we're doing. So I think for the minimal investment that it is to tissue test, to get 1, maybe 2 a year done, and John will help you, what you need to do to balance out, if you're at a critical point. Because when these pumpkins are doing 50 plus pounds a day, if you're behind the curve, it's very, very difficult to make up on the bell curve. You want to keep that at peak growth for as long as you can, and the only way you can do that is have your soil and your nutrients right. And once you start coming down the mountain because you weren't feeding enough or your soil wasn't right, it's not like you want those peaks to go up and down. You really want to stay up at that top and maintain and hold it for as long as you can. Tissue testing is extremely, extremely important, and it, for the benefit it gives us, I think it's very reasonable to do. And back to Joe's question earlier about watering, I believe he asked, we didn't have to water much, like I said, from August on last year, but on a normal season, I'm finding about 100 gallons of water a day works in our patch. Once again, that's sandy loam. Sometimes I was cutting that back to 75, 80 gallons because I found out in the past that I have overwatered. And once you overwater a plant, you senesce them, you age them a lot quicker. And I work with Steve Delitis a lot too, and nobody can deny the unbelievable success he's had as a grower. He's extremely intelligent. He does a lot with water gauges and a whole computer system that shows him soil moisture probes, where his moisture's at. And I do a little bit to that extent to let me know where my moisture's at. And what he found this year in his research is that from the base to the pumpkin, so to speak, as the plant got older, and this is common sense, but I never thought of it, as the plant got older, that he was watering that area of the plant too much. Out in front of the pumpkin, he was finding that 100 gallons to 125 gallons of water a day was not enough. He was still way low on his moisture probes as to what level of moisture was great for his root system of his plants, because Steve's been working on this system for many years. So, and a light bulb went off to me. I said, that makes a lot of sense, because those old roots and leaves, once those leaves reach their max, they're not getting any bigger. And that root system, it only makes sense that if we keep putting more and more water manually on those areas, that maybe we're senescing the root system a lot earlier. Maybe we're aging it. Maybe we're flaring up pythium. Pythium's a water mold. That's one of the #1 things all growers will deal with it sometimes. Sometimes you have pythium on roots and you won't even notice it because it does not show above ground. But you will get roots that start to die off. So I said, Steve, I think you're onto something. So I'm going to test that this year by putting a probe halfway down between the base and the pumpkin, and another probe out front of the pumpkin. Because other than rain, there's nothing I could have did this year. We had way too much rainfall. I was very fortunate to get any pumpkins to the scale at the end of the year with the type of rain that we had. But I really do think he's onto something, that maybe when we're doing our watering from mid to late season, maybe that one half of the plant, I can back off a little bit, and it only makes sense that the newer stuff out in front would be hungry and require more water. So I'm still always trying to fine tune what's the right mix between water and fertilizers and stuff like that. But I think Steve made a lot of sense with his watering analogy when I spoke with him recently.
Question?
Hello, my name's Gary Shenfish, and what I want to know is what kind of mixture you use when you go to bury the sides and they,
Well, what kind of what?
What kind of mixture,
Like
with
vine burying mix.
Sure. I use about 4 pots, Mycorrhizal, 1 pot, 1 pot azos. I make up my own mixture. Azos and Mycorrhizal mixed together is fine. I also mix root shield in there. Okay, root shield, trichoderma is very good for plants. It helps, protect roots and stuff like that. I do not recommend root shield at all mixed for long term. That's why, any type of root shield mixed with Mycorrhizal, root shield is aggressive and it will chew on Mycorrhizal. In a package they don't play well together. In the soil, it's like the equivalent of putting a seal in the ocean. Yeah, there's sharks out there, but they can sustain a population because in the soil there's millions of microbes and everybody's fighting to gain promise in the root zone. So in the soil, it's fine. In a bag for long periods of time, it's not recommended. So I do that. I do some micronutrients there. I do micronutrients foliar, and I do it in my mix because in my soil, once again, manganese always seems to be a problem. It gets blocked out by the high iron that's in my well water. So I know through my usage over the year, I have to add some manganese, a little bit of copper. I'd rather add that below ground than on the leaves because copper can be harsh on leaves. So pretty much mycorrhizae, azos, some micronutrients, and some root shield is pretty much about it. You know, if I'm noticing a problem or I have something else or I have to give something a boost, I'll change the mix up a bit, but that's pretty much my mix. You know, everybody's got their own mixture they like to use, and they like to mix everything and put it in a coffee can. And you know, a lot of people use, you know, kelp meal and stuff like that, you know, humic, you know, granular humic, you know, acids and things like that, and that all works. And it's all finding a balance of what you think works in your garden.
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, who's next? Joe. Come on down, Joe, in the hot seat.
Hi, Ron. Joe Notario. I've only been doing this like 4 years. What is the up-and-coming genetics, because I'm kind of into the genetic end of it, and also what's your thought process when you decide what you're going to cross?
Sure. Great question. Genetics. You know, the genetics in this hobby are so good right now, and they're truly unbelievable. I feel genetics, when you get a hot seed, you get about 3 years, and you'll reach the max growth on a seed within 3 years. The guy 2145 surpassed the 2009 as the best seed of all time, and rightly so. It's the best seed of all time. You know, me, I still have from it. I'm gonna Mike, because I feel now the genetics, the 2145 offsprings are better than the 2145. 2145 is the best seed of all time, but what it's producing as offsprings, if you take a look at last year and what they produced, it did some incredible things. So genetics are always moving forward in this hobby, and we haven't leveled off yet. So anything with the 2145 in it, obviously now, and I always thought the 2145 genetics needed a little bit more 2009 in it. So I always look for genetics that someone's taken the 2145 and added the 2009 to it. And that's why I kind of look at my list all the time here. I really like this 2170 Deletus coming up for this year. I really think that could be an all-star. You know, basically, you know, Steve had a tremendous year, but, you know, looking at my notes, that's a 1937 Urena, which was from my 2230. Steve had the world record 2624 into it. 2624 is the best of the best of the 2145. So you're solidifying some genetics, adding some dissimilar things to it. And then Steve had such a great year that, you know, the pollinator for that 2170 was his 2400 pounder that was crazy heavy. I like the shape on it. So I like when you got heavy on one end and you're bringing in, you know, I really think adding, you know, that 2170 is going to add a little bit more 2009 from the Urena seed. I'm really high in it. I'm only growing 4 plants this year. I normally do 6 to 8. I've done that for years, and quite frankly, I'm just too busy now, even with retiring from the country club, that I just can't grow 8 plants anymore. And I think I'll be a better grower with 4, because you're really going to be extremely dialed in to compete now with seeing what all these amazing growers are doing. But as far as genetics, you know, once again, our hobby's been kind of simple. Big times big equals bigger, and that's how we've been able to do it. But anything with the 2145 in it, and going back to 2009 to try to solidify that a little more, is what I look for now. I really like the 1928 Deletus, you know, as well. I saw that on a local level. A grower here had an 1800 pounder. that Joe Jutras kind of looked over this year, and Steve did well with it. And me and Joe think if that was pushed a little bit harder this year, that that pumpkin that we saw locally could have been over 2,000 pounds. We were so impressed with what it had done. So I think that holds a lot of promise, for this year too. My 1733, from 2017, did so well for Dan and Holly Boyce this year. That was pollinated July 6th or something like that, and had 2,000 pounds. And I think you missed 2.5 weeks of pollination. I think that was a 2,400 pound pumpkin. That's kind of the way I look at things. I look at something first year out of the gate and say, okay, if this pumpkin grew 2,200 pounds for the first year, and it really wasn't planted by a lot of people. What I do is I go to the bigpumpkins.com, I go to the GPC site, and I see how many times something's been planted. And if I see something that pops up, and I say, okay, this person grew this pumpkin from it. Okay, well, I don't think that person grabbed the best seed. It's almost impossible out of 300, 400, 500 seeds that you reached into a jar and you grabbed out the one with the most potential. So if somebody did really good first year out on a seed and it wasn't planted by a lot of people, I kind of take a look at that and it moves up the ladder a bit for me, because it's all based on potential. Like when I chose my 1733 to do for this year, I like the genetics on paper. And so I said, let's see what that do. I saw the shape Dan and Holly had, which is kind of what I look for, bomb-proof. I like pumpkins that are long and kind of wide, because that pumpkin, you could have put your foot and stood on it, the pumpkin itself, and never blew it up. Didn't have any dill rings, didn't have any deficiencies that I saw. And I said, well, it was pollinated. It was pollinated 2 weeks late, because prime pollination now, you look at the charts, is by summer solstice, by 21st of June or a little bit earlier, give or take. That's kind of, if you can do it, that's when they kind of need to be done. But I looked at what they had, and I said, well, they missed a couple of weeks and never really got planted last year. So that meant to me that I think that pumpkin has 2,500 pound potential or more. But once again, potential means you haven't done anything yet. So I guess we'll see this year. I love that, obviously the 1911, I love the genetics on paper because there's some dissimilar lines in it. And the pumpkin that Steve Geddes had this year was incredible. Once again, I like the shape of it and everything else. So obviously, if something grew 2,500 pounds, it definitely deserves to be planted. But I love the genetic end of it too, but I spend a decent amount of time looking at it. But it's not like in the old days when you sat there all winter long trying to find that one seed. There's really no one seed anymore. These genetics are just so damn good across the board. That I don't think you have to spend all winter looking at them. Just go right to Big Pumpkins, go right to the GPC page, and take a look at that top 20 pumpkins. And then, I always try to take a look at it, maybe one unproven in my patch, because I do believe genetics are moving forward. Only doing 4 plants. I'm going to do 4 plants plus a 150 square foot plant this year in a separate garden. And the reason I'm going to do that is for a lot of the people who start out on my website don't have a lot of room, so I'm going to grow one real small plant. But only doing 4 plants, I can only take a shot on one unproven, because, as you know, because it looks good on paper. Typical example was last year. I was all in on the Holland seed for this year. I thought that was going to revolutionize the genetics of the hobby. It got planted by so many growers and top growers, and for some reason or another, it just didn't work out, and that happens sometimes. So that's, when you're only doing a few plants, you got to really be dialed in and go with something that's, what I call proven. So once again, the genetics are just just tremendous. I look for big on one side, big on the other side. A lot of stuff with the 1810 Werner in the background, way in the background, seem to be pushing stuff forward because Quinn's line's a little dissimilar to the normal stuff that's out there. So I found that in some of the genetics out there to look for. I kind of look for that in the background somewhere. So.
What else?
Master Wallace had one more question. Anthesis or any other strategy to try to get that little pumpkin to multiply those cells those
Sure.
first 20 days?
I I never used anthesis. Matt's a really smart guy, got a lot of respect for him, I'll say that. You know, I don't know. Would I fool around with maybe one or two on something this year, next year? I'm researching some things. I always keep an open mind to go forward. But to me, that's all about cell division, cell elongation. And if your calcium and your boron is right at pollination, from my research and my studies, that's what we should be focused in on. And that's where it should be. But I could be wrong. I'm certainly not afraid to admit when I'm wrong, and I always keep an open mind. So I'm still researching that, still studying. I may take a shot on something this year, but once again, if you just go on the internet, it's a great place. Just go on there and you look at cell division, cell elongation of fruit, and they're gonna bring you right to calcium boron, and that's where it all happens, and it's gotta happen fast. That's why tissue test a week to 10 days before pollination, because some of that stuff just doesn't get right in the plant, and changes aren't really made overnight. Magnesium's pretty easy. Some of the early NPKs are easy to get the plant to turn around, but calcium is a difficult one to get mobile through the plant. So you really, I pretty much go for 75, maybe as high as 80% calcium base saturation, 15, maybe up to 20% max on magnesium, 4 to 6% potassium. Potassium's very important for us, but it's a huge player. Figure like a golf ball going through a garden hose. Potassium will block a lot of uptake to the plant because it is so dominant. So you have to be careful with it. Times very much needed for us, especially during fruit load stress. But potassium has no problem getting up into the plant and fast, but it will block other things too.
On that, how about the potassium silicates? What's your opinion on those?
Yeah, I haven't used any because the potassium is pretty balanced in my soil, so I really haven't had to use any. Potassium sulfate, typical granular is what I use in the spring, but backed off last year because potassium get a little too fat, and once that was happening, it was blocking out magnesium. So I had to really up my, kind of a quick fix for, magnesium deficiencies or Epsom salts. I mean, Epsom salts is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I mean, if you have, a lot of times we have sulfur, blockages in our pumpkin plants because of, some of the products we use, and we've ramped our soils up to sustain growth. And Epsom salts, you put it down the next day, your plants are shining, and, when I had issues, in the past or even this year, I used tanks to put my water in, and, I was using about 4 to 6 ounces, for like 3 plants of Epsom salts a couple days in a row. And you'd be surprised how that sulfur in there makes that magnesium readily available. It brings your plants up quick. So the silicates with the potassium I have not used because I haven't had to. I think our cell walls in these plants are pretty much strengthened up from all our soil. I mean, if you look at a giant pumpkin grower's soil, it's so far more advanced than the average home gardener that, a lot of the stuff we're doing to get the soils proper is helping us not use a lot of things.
I have a question about, on Western Labs, on boron. Supposedly you can go way too much on boron and really hurt it, but
Sure.
what kind of readings do you consider maximum in
Sure.
boron? In the soil test.
Sure. You know what boron rhymes with?
Moron.
Moron. Okay, and I've been a moron. Okay, so I've experienced, with that, and I have to add boron here, and I simply go to Walmart and buy borax, and borax is another thing you could talk about for days. It's got a million usages on it, and I really love the product. Me personally, I was using about 1 ounce on 4 plants, once or twice a week if I needed to. The tissue testing is gonna tell you pretty much where you need to be on your boron and how much to add. As far as in the soil goes, man, that's totally different, and I hate to give you an exact number on that, because it all depends on your soil. Boron's one of the things I just generally never give an amount or recommendation on, because it is so easy to be toxic, and I've been toxic on it several times because I pushed the envelope too much. The year I had the 2307, and Pap had his North American record, I was pushing boron to the brink. And what you'll notice is on your newer leaves, you'll get like little orange flecks and spots in them, and the newer leaves will get crinkly. That's boron toxicity, and I had that several times that year because I pushed boron to the max. So I backed off that a bit, because I need to sustain my plants to be better looking down the stretch run. And this year it was difficult to do that, but I think I'm trying to make sure that the plant is fresh for the stretch run is very important. So as far as your question on boron, I don't know if I answered it fully for you, but once again, Western Labs has a great program that'll show you your boron in the soil. Adding boron to the soil, I found here in New England, once again, sandy loam soil, wasn't hanging around for me. It was a waste of time and money. So I generally had to add that in my soil drenches. I think people have seen from my diaries and stuff. And that's another thing too. My diary fell off the face of the earth last year in July because, quite frankly, it was just crazy for me with the business and growing. But I am going to be starting the diary back up again soon. Have hired somebody to work with me in my business this year, so I'll be able to do once or twice a week diary updates, so people can see what I'm doing. It might help a few people. But I put water in 275 gallon tanks, and whatever I'm drenching in the water, a lot of times it's just straight humic fulvic acid. I use humic fulvic every single time I water out of those tanks. It's one of the best things to feed soil microbes, makes nutrients readily available. So sometimes I'm really not mixing much of my water, but I put water, I put the water in there, and I pH my water. I think that's another big thing in the hobby, another big step that's going to be taken eventually, and I learned that from the pot growers about pHing your water and how it makes nutrients available. I didn't do it as much last year because I just got so busy. There was a couple things I had to go by the wayside, and one was pHing water and stuff like that. But I think that's very important. But that's where I'll add my boron, borax. Anything I do gets in those 275 gallon tanks of water. I let the water heat up. It takes about a day. If I put water in the day before, the next day the water's nice and warm, and that's kind of how I water my plants too.
Thank you.
Questions?
Oh, by the way, that question on powdery mildew, Eagle. Eagle's been around forever, and I use Eagle like once a week, third week of June through mid-September. I haven't had a speck of powdery mildew here in years, and Eagle's a good product. It can get mixed with other things. I did an experiment last year. In the last 4 to 5 weeks of the season, I got upside down. Still had 8 pumpkins out there. I knew 4 of them would be pretty good competition locally, and 1 of them would be like pretty decent world competition. But there was 3 of them that weren't going to be in competition for anything. And quite frankly, I was burnt out. I lost 25 pounds growing last summer, just from working in the garden all year, and had way too much vegetable garden, way too much everything. So this year that'll be different. But anyways, I said, I'm gonna take these plants, and they were in my other garden. I said, I'm not gonna spray anymore. I'm done spraying. I said, because it'll save me a little time and effort to do these other ones. We're gonna see what happens here. Well, we had more heat, more humidity, more rainfall, record rainfall in New England. We were getting 2 to 3 inches of rainfall a week here, and for us, such a tremendous amount. Those plants at the end of the year, and Joe just see Sperry Rover, and I said, well, these are the trial plants that I stopped spraying, 4 weeks ago. And they looked at them and they said, wow, there's not a speck of powdery mildew on those plants. I started to get a couple of aphids from them. I used Merit for aphids. Merit is an aphid killer. You use that every couple of weeks, you're not gonna have aphids anymore. But I did get a couple of aphids that started to set in, but no powdery mildew. And So I know, being formerly in the golf course industry, we used to spend about $500,000 a year just on chemicals to maintain 18 holes. And they never sprayed or drenched like I was doing to combat certain diseases. So what it showed me last year is that when it says on this label that product can go a couple of weeks and it can do the same, it certainly can. So I think I need to back off and dial back a little bit, because these products are so good that we're spraying on the leaves foliar. Even though we do our own watering, I do a lot of hand watering. I love hand watering. It's therapeutic for me. I put the radio on and I know how many gallons I'm putting on 1,000 square foot. I like doing that. But as long as whatever you're doing, if you're doing, a foliar application for insects or disease, if that dries on the leaves, this stuff is so good now. They say it only has to be on there a couple of hours and you can get rainfall and you're still good for 7 days, 10, 14 days. If you're using a contact like Daconil, which is the trade name is chloranathanil, that's one of the biggest things that's used in the industry. You always want to have a contact and a systemic together in your tank when you're spraying your plants. My whole point is, I think I'm going to back off just a tiny bit of the sprays. I think it's going to help my plants stay a bit fresher for the stretch run, because if we were going to have powdery mildew, rhizoctonia, and all that stuff, I certainly would have had it last year, because there's no way we could have got any more rain or humidity, and it rained all day, all night, and that's all it ever did was rain. So I think the chemicals are working so good that I can back off a little bit and keep plants fresher for longer.
I heard foliage watering
Jack.
aids the plants versus underground. All I do is foliage over the top, overhead water.
Does foliar feeding age the plant prematurely?
Well, just the
Yeah,
watering,
I
just
think
the general
it's-
watering. Because I don't water underneath like a lot of them good
Yeah.
growers.
Well, I certainly do think foliar, eventually, that stuff just keeps building up and building up and building up on the leaves. That's why the older leaves, they're out there, they're the oldest, they've been around the longest. That's why they senesce, they age a lot quicker than everything else. So yes, I think they can, and they do, and that's why I'm looking into it to sort of back off a little bit, but you need proper protection. You don't want to miss a spray and then have your season go down the drain, with a month left to go. So there's a fine line.
Well, is that harmful to water on the foliage rather than underneath? Over.
Just water, period, Rod.
Watering. I water overhead all the time, because
My watering is so rudimentary, it's so basic. I tried drip irrigation, I went all in on that, and I ripped it out the first year because I can't bury vines with it. I got aggravated.
Exactly.
I found that through my experiences, a lot of people, Dave Stelz uses it and he has tremendous success with it. I don't have the patience to deal with it, because I found at one end of the drip system versus the beginning, you weren't getting the same amount of nutrients and stuff at the end of the line as you were at the beginning. I burnt it. I threw it all in the fire pit at the end of the year and burnt my drip irrigation system, and I never went back to it. My watering is as basic as it gets. You can stand there with a hose and water, I'm all about, those leaves are cupped. The water's gonna run right down the leaf stem and right into the root where it needs to be. When you get rainfall, how's it come down? You wanna wet the root zone. And so my watering system is very basic, other than the big tanks, and I use a Wayne 3/4 horse pump that I can dump 275 gallons in 30 minutes. And so I was doing 3 to 4 plants. I highly recommend it. We have Craigslist back here. You can go get those tanks. Sometimes they give them away. I think it's like $50 for a tank. I always recommend people, hey, this is a great way to water. Just get a nice pump, put it in there, mix all your stuff, put it in the tank. You know how many gallons you're doing per plant. You got everything right in front of you. You can pH the water. And if you have chlorine issues, you put the water in the tank, chlorine's gone.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I've got a question. What brand of fertilizers do you use, or just any just general advice for fertilizing, kind of in general?
Well, it all depends on what you need. That's why tissue testing once again comes into play, because I'm probably a bad salesman. I tell people that all the time because I don't push a lot of stuff because it's just not my nature. But I can't tell You know, I can't tell Wizzy or Pete, I can't tell you guys what you need if I'm not in your patch and I don't have access to your tissue tests and stuff like that. But triple 12, you know, from Growth Products is one that I use, you know, quite a bit. You know, I use the Growth Products line because they got the lowest levels of salts in the fertilizer game. And I've been working with that company since 2003. And, you know, you get a lot of bang for your buck. It has salicylic acid in the triple 12, you know, which is, you know, an aspirin for plants. It works very well. So, you know, CalMag Max, you know, from Growth Products, I use a lot. There's calcium and magnesium in there that I'll spoon feed with that. You know, 0025 is one if you have, you know, potassium issues, you know, or at the end of the season during fruit load stress. Sometimes it doesn't matter how much potassium you have in your soil. I mean, we're sucking up 50 pounds a day growth or more. I don't care how much potassium you have. At some point, you're gonna have to balance it out with a little bit more. I mean, once again, I found that I can't stress enough that I have sandy loam soil here. It doesn't matter how much compost you put down. I'm in New England. You know, we are called the Ocean State, Rhode Island. There's a reason for it. And the microbes chew everything up, and you know, it's a good thing we have really good drainage, or I would have been in trouble this year. TKO phosphite, I use a lot of. You know, it has phosphorus in it and potassium, but you know, phosphite. You know, phosphite's basically eliminated heritage in the golf course industry. Heritage was the #1 disease control, you know, issue. But you know, product that we were using in the golf course industry, we would probably spend, you know, almost $100,000 a year on heritage, and heritage has been almost replacing the entire golf course industry because the phosphites were very, very cheap, and they were doing as good, if not a better job. #1. #2 is the plants weren't building up resistancy to it. So you get a lot of resistancy when you use, you know, oxystrobins like heritage and things like that. You know, even Subdue, they recommend a couple of drenches a year now. Heritage, like 1 drench a year and run away from it. So if you're still using heritage or anything like that, you got to really look about the resistancy issues, because what they're finding is the microbes in the 2nd and 3rd generation, when they're born and they're breeding, that they're already resistant to some of this stuff. So when the label says, you know, 1 or 2, and don't use it anymore, there's a reason for it, because that company spent millions of dollars in field trials and testing to make sure to see what the resistancy issues are. So the phosphite is great because you don't get resistancy issues from it too, and it works through that exome system of the plant very, very fast. So it's TKO is a great product.
Any more
Yeah, I use,
questions?
you know, once again, I use calcium nitrate in the spring. I use good old-fashioned calcium nitrate. You can pick that up cheap at any ag center, because in cool soils in the beginning of the season, you know, calcium and that stuff, nothing mobile, nothing's working. You know, a little water soluble calcium nitrate, good old-fashioned synthetics, that'll pick a plant up just like that. You don't have to do much of it.
Anybody leave?
And,
Andrew?
I use a lot of essential too, essential and companion from Growth Products. Essential has one of the highest levels of amino acids, you know, that are allowed, you know, in a bottle. And, you know, once again, you know, Growth Products, you know, they make a tremendous product. So I use pretty much essential, you know, once every 3 weeks. Companion every 2 weeks is, you know, the companion is my biological drench, you know, that I go with. So, you know, like I said, my system's a lot of biologicals in the beginning, then I come in with a heavy hammer during heavy disease pressure, and then I'll go back in with biologicals and stuff. So, you know, like I said, my system's sort of 80-20, 80% organics and 20% synthetic, so chemicals.
Cool. Betsy, you had a question?
Yeah, you know, I always found TKO and Subdue and Eagle, those are hard. They're harsh. They age those leaves. Is it worth it? Really?
So Betsy said that like TKO, Eagle 20, those are just really harsh chemicals that she found ages her plants. And she asked, is it worth it?
Sure, I haven't noticed that in the TKO, you know, or the Eagle myself, you know, personally. But, you know, the TKO, I believe, is a couple ounces per 1,000 square foot, which is not a lot of product. You can actually go up to 5 ounces per 1,000 on a TKO. But the thing about using products like this is you have to pay attention to the labels. Because, you know, same as like the golf course industry, you could use like an ounce or 2 per 1,000, but it's the amount of water needed to get proper coverage to carry 1,000 square foot. So when someone's using that backpack spray, it's backpack blowers everybody uses now, and I have one, that's 3.5 gallons, okay? You need at least a couple gallons of water to cover 1,000 square foot of a pumpkin plant. So when you're putting, you know, so if I'm only using an ounce per 1,000, an ounce per 1,000 in a gallon is pretty strong. An ounce per gallon in 2 gallons of water, you're still getting the same effectiveness from it, but you're getting better coverage. So maybe you're not using enough water as a carrier, because obviously the less amount of water you have, the stronger the mixture is going to be. So really read those labels. It's all about the amount of active ingredient, AI. That's what they want, and they don't care if you're using 5 gallons of water per 1,000 or a quart per 1,000. It's what you need to get proper coverage, and the less water you have, it's only going to make for a stronger mixture. I use TKO as a drench too as well. I found it very effective as a drench to get picked up through the root system. And what I do too is, if I've got boron in there, or I've got Epsom salts, or if I have things like that in there, I run my sprinklers afterwards. I think it's a really good idea to go overhead. You know, if you're doing foliar, you want that to dry in the leaves. If you're doing a drench and you put it on over the top like I do, I think it's a good idea to turn your sprinklers on just to wash that stuff off the leaves afterwards a bit and get it into the soil where it needs to be. Because yes, we are senescing and aging the leaves earlier by the amount of stuff we're putting on. So it's a balancing act. We've got to be careful, because I make the mistakes myself, and I've caught myself like, man, I wish my plant was better down a stretch, but it's not. So I've made those mistakes too, and I'm trying to correct and backing off things.
Cool. Any last questions, or should we let Ron get back to looking at pumpkin genetics?
Ask him what jersey he's wearing Friday night.
What jersey are you wearing Friday night?
Well, I tell you one thing, my favorite football player of all time is the great Jim Kelly. So I'll have Jim Kelly's jersey on Friday night, because he's one of the toughest, best athletes I've ever seen play in the history of sports, and I am a Buffalo Bills fan. So I'll have Jim Kelly's jersey on for Friday night. So
who's winning the game?
You know something? I live in New England, and Pats fans are obnoxious. I give all the world. It's been the best run in the history of sports that I've ever seen, from coach to quarterback, and it starts with ownership. It's been an unprecedented run. I am not jealous. I'm not envious. Do I want him to go away? Hell yeah. I don't think Brady gets beat. He's the best I've ever seen. I do want that era to go, and it is going away, because I will tell you this: you're gonna say you heard it here first. You watch out for the Buffalo Bills, because this Josh Allen kid can play, and they are only a few pieces away. They got $90 million to spend this year. They got draft picks. The Buffalo Bills are very, very close, and I think the Patriots win. I don't think it's close. I don't think Belichick. I don't think he gets beat by a young coach, a young quarterback. For my friends who are Pats fans who've been there forever, I'm happy for them, but it's enough now. You won 5 Super Bowls. So if the Pats win, I'm happy for my friends who are fans. I can't cheer for them, can't root for them. Matter of fact, I go to a local bar all the time, and they serve draft beer. They only have his Patriots logos on theirs, and I always turn the logo away from them. Having the Patriots emblem for me. So that's my prediction. Patriots will win. Next year, Bills will win the division.
All right, well, everybody, Ron, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much to everybody for the support. I am really humbled by the support in the giant pumpkin growing community for myself and Pap. It's been, I think this is our 29th year that we're going to be growing this year, and I love all of you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ron. We'll take you
Have a good day.